Thanks for all the excellent feedback on my last video about the continuous flow kiln. I'm glad you've all been paying attention and exercising your brains. I'm almost tempted to rebuild it, but no, as I said in the video, it would all need to be stainless steel for a start, and there's no way I could afford that. This is a shoestring enterprise, remember, as is everything else around here. In fact, I might just change my name to Shoestring Tim. And I'm done with it. Shoestring Tim. Yeah, maybe. So I've gone back to my original cone kiln for this experiment, except first Will and I had to make it bigger, much bigger. Cut from a square of 4mm steel in this shape, bent upwards from the bottom and welded up along the seams. It works in a different way to a standard charcoal kiln, so you may not be familiar with it, but it works really well, except this one's just not big enough. Nowhere near big enough for what I need.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, there's a bit of a curve in there. Should be pretty close. So we could do another one the same as that, couldn't we?
So Will and I scrabbled about and found enough steel to cut 4 more pieces to add to it. The heat had distorted the cone shape, so straightening it up enough to attach the additional plates was a bit of a struggle.
Yeah, both ends there's a gap in the middle it's touching.
What about if you turn it over? Would it fit better?
Pretty good.
Some of the steel was very old and rusty, and another piece had holes in it, but the plasma cutter did a great job, and old and rusty doesn't matter for this job.
The double bevel cone kiln.
But eventually, we got it all tacked up.
A hole there.
Then Will went away and left me to weld up the seams on the outside, all 16 feet of them. I added some angle iron to the top edges too, to try to keep them straight. There is an interesting reason why I made it this shape, which I'll explain in a bit. But at this point it was too heavy for me to move on my own, so it was a good thing that Ashley turned up to give me a hand.
Nearly went through it then, didn't it? Okay. It's quite heavy though, isn't it?
Theoretically, cone kilns can be any size, but is that true in practice? Well, we'll find out in a bit. We installed it in position below the wood chip hopper, but there's nothing in the hopper yet. Finally, it's time to see what happens when we try to fill it. Bring on the wood chip wagon. Filled months ago with wood chips, it's been sitting patiently in the drying tunnel ever since. Open the roof. Park the wagon over the hopper.
Nice sound effects actually, great. Okay, a bit more. Stop! Ooh.
And release the trapdoors. Go on, what do you think will happen? I thought some would come out and the rest would just sit there ignoring gravity, but I was wrong. In fact, almost none came out. Oh no!
Who needs floors? Because they just stay in anyway. I think I'll need a pokey thing.
Oh well, the problem is mostly down to the long connecting rod that runs from front to back. I'll just cut it out for future loads. It was really only needed if I was pulling a long train of these wagons, but if I only push them one at a time, then I don't think there's going to be any sort of issue. A bit of poking with a stick dislodged this load anyway. That wagon can go back down to the engine shed to be refilled with fresh chips.
Here we go. Oh no.
No. Oh, total failure.
One thing after another thing. We have liftoff. Hooray!
Can't see a thing, but
It's in here.
This is just a removable pipe that goes directly to the bottom.
More fuel.
I have some ideas about how to speed up this early stage of the pyrolysis process, but for now, let's just see how long it takes from scratch.
Put up. Oh look, more fuel.
As you know, charcoal is made by cooking wood without oxygen. Usually, you'd use a sealed container for that called a retort, but a cone kiln achieved the same thing in a different way.
Can't see anything. 507 already.
Once the cone is hot, the air pressure inside reduces, and that draws air into it over the top edges. The air flows down the inside walls and onto the top of the fire, where the oxygen in the air reacts chemically with the gases and the carbon in the timber. In other words, it burns. More heat is generated, and that moves the air and the flames upwards, and so the cycle continues. Now, if that's all that happened, soon all you'd have is some ash at the bottom and lots of carbon dioxide in the air. But if you keep adding dry fuel on top, then an interesting thing happens instead. All the oxygen gets used up at the top layer where the flames are and doesn't have a chance to penetrate down into the lower levels of the embers. But the heat does, because heat radiates out in all directions, including downwards, where it literally cooks the wood that's below the surface. But the wood gets cooked without oxygen, and that leaves charcoal. That's nice and simple, isn't it? But we still have to fix that charcoal at the end of the process, and we'll get to that in a minute. In the meantime, we just kept adding layers of chips as they burned down. Now there's still plenty of moisture in them. Keeping them in the drying tunnel has brought down the moisture content from maybe 80% when they first were cut up down to the ambient air moisture level, but that's still maybe 20% here at the moment, even more when it's raining. That means that steam and smoke comes off these chips when they first go onto the fire. It evaporates very quickly, and as soon as the moisture's gone, you can see that it burns hot and clean. But still, I think the final kiln design will need to include an extra chip warmer so they go in even drier. But still, it's all working and things are getting very hot in there. Now, I also made a simple retort kiln as well, partly to compare results, partly to make use of all the heat that's being generated, and partly to cook sausages with. This retort is just an old low-pressure gas bottle with the top taken off. I made a new lid for it from a piece I cut for something else, so I had to patch the holes in it first. It's filled with small logs and chips for this test. Lovely. And then we put it on top of the burning cone like a big kebab. It's quite heavy, is it? Now remember, this is just the first test firing for this new setup. There will be lots more built on around it eventually, but I have to start somewhere. As you can see, the first obvious thing is the huge amount of heat that is being lost. My plan is to capture as much as possible of this and store it cleverly and then move it to the house for hot water and warm rooms. And depending how successful that is, perhaps I could go further than that too. Many people have suggested sand for the storage medium or water, but there are serious pros and cons for both, and I'm looking forward to exploring that subject with you all soon. Before I build anything else though, I just needed to see it and feel it in action to get an idea about how hot this is and the size and the layout of what could be added. I'll need a chimney too, where I can add secondary air if necessary, and where I can monitor emissions to make sure everything is burned off super cleanly. Incidentally, if you were wondering about the carbon dioxide that is being released by this burn, remember that if these wood chips had just been left to rot on the ground, or put on the compost or used as a mulch, far more CO2 would end up being released. That's because all the microorganisms that rot them away are part of a cycle that converts that timber back into CO2 gas. And if this wood had been burned in an ordinary wood stove, then obviously all the carbon in it would be released to the air, except it wouldn't be running this hot, so the combustion would be less complete. So there would be more carbon monoxide, for instance, emitted, as well as other gases. For a really clean burn, you need to go really hot. Remember too that every living thing on this planet, including trees and people, is carbon based, and when those things die they all end up being either eaten by something big or small, or else burned. Those are the only two natural options available for you and me and for everything. That's how all the chemicals inside us get recycled. So when trees die or when people die and rot away, that's another way of saying they're being eaten by bacteria and funguses. Or we could be cremated, but either way, all the carbon inside us, sooner or later, is converted to gas and ends up back in the air. There's only one alternative that I know of, and that's pyrolysis, where you're not burned but cooked into charcoal, which doesn't seem to be an option for people, but we can do that with trees, and that's what we're doing here. Let's calm it down with more fuel, eh?
Yeah. Momentarily it'll work.
Yeah, exactly. By now the fire is hot and greedy. That is why the bigger the cone kiln, the better, because now we're making charcoal really quickly and efficiently.
Yeah.
The retort kiln was in the way now, so it had to come off, even though it wasn't really ready. You'll see that in a minute.
You think this is very far? Into the house now.
This looks like smoke, but it's actually almost all water vapour.
Okay.
Not
Thank you.
steam, of course, because steam is invisible.
Shovel a load on there quick.
The burn gets faster and faster and hotter, and it only takes another few minutes and the kiln is full up. So we needed to take the final step and fix the charcoal. If we did nothing, then the fire would cool down and the oxygen would work its way down through the embers, allowing the charcoal to burn, and tomorrow morning there'd only be ashes left in there. So either this needs an airtight lid put on immediately, or we do this. We stop the burn and create steam at the same time with a hose pipe.
Yeah.
I poured some directly down the steel pipe into the bottom of the kiln. But then I put some on the top. I'm not sure which is best really. Now steam is essential for splitting the charcoal microscopically. This is the process that gives us what's called activated charcoal. It hugely increases the surface area and creates millions of tiny voids in the structure. Activated charcoal is what you take if you have an upset stomach, and it's what you need if you want to make water filters, and if you go on to make biochar, agricultural charcoal, which is what this is for. But we're not at that point yet. This is not biochar exactly, but it's activated charcoal, and it's a very interesting form of carbon. I hope to explore this further in later videos. It needs grinding up before I can do anything else with it, but that's for another day. I'm just really pleased that I have my first load of activated charcoal from my wood chip line. As I say, every bit of this charcoal would have turned to carbon dioxide in an ordinary bonfire or on a compost heap, but now it's locked into an inert state and will still look like this in 1,000 years' time. So the carbon that the trees took in from the air as they grew is now in a solid, stable form, and it's all black. What interesting chemistry this all is.
Yeah, just the very top. Yeah. It's really good.
If we went down this...
Oh yeah, that's an interesting.
Oh, here comes the water level. Lovely job. Country. Meanwhile, the retort kiln has stopped hissing out steam. It really needed another half an hour to successfully char everything inside. There was plenty of heat available, but it really goes to show how good an insulator air is. The gaps between the logs inside was enough to slow down the heat moving through the retort, so a lot of this just didn't get hot enough. That's the problem with retort kilns. You can never be sure quite what's going on inside them. There was some good charcoal in there though. This is used for making fireworks and lots of other chemical processes, and for drawing with, or for makeup and skincare products. I hope to use it for blacksmithing one day, but for now, it cooks a fine sausage.